Hello and welcome to the final webinar in our Funding Your Vision series presented by Evangelical Christian Credit Union. I'm Connie Duran, a Relationship Manager here at ECCU, and I will be your moderator during today's presentation. In just a moment I'll introduce our presenter, but before I do that, it's always nice to find out who is listening. We have 58% of you are churches. Thank you so much for joining us. And 30% of you are other types of ministry organizations, and then we have some Christian schools and we have some mission sending agencies on the line. So thank you so much for attending. We are looking forward to this presentation today. What we're going to discuss today, let's review that a little bit here. How commercial lending criteria have changed in the last 5 years. We're also going to be talking about how to qualify for financing to fund your vision. Another topic is the cost of financing to fund your vision, and I know that's a big question that I get as I'm talking to ministries. So let's introduce our presenter today. I'm excited to do this. Again, I'm Connie Duran, and I have the privilege of consulting with ministries across the country and internationally. And joining me today is a fellow colleague, David Lee. David works in ECCU's Colorado regional office, so I don't always get to see him, so this is a treat to have him here today. He is also on the pastoral staff of a Denver area church and has pastored for over 21 years. He has served as the president and treasurer of the Colorado Springs chapter of the Christian Leadership Alliance. He earned his bachelor's degree in finance from California State University, Fullerton, and his master's degree in Christian education from Talbot School of Theology. As a certified treasury professional, David is committed to equipping ministries to be better informed and helping them to be more effective at reaching their communities with the gospel. So we definitely have saved the best for last in this series, and let's welcome David.
Connie, thanks so much. And yeah, sorry about all the technical difficulties there. I guess it's a good and bad thing sometimes when you're dependent upon technology to be able to run the ministry. Boy, how did we do ministry back in the old days? It's really a joy to be with each and every one of you this morning and maybe this afternoon for some of you there on the East Coast and from across the world. You know, as we begin taking a look at really what it means to fund your vision with financing, I think it's going to be important for us to first begin with the vision. You know, vision drives everything, and that's really what this whole webinar is about. You know, one of the things I kind of wanted to, as I consult with a lot of ministries, and a lot of our relationship managers do, the question that we want to be asking a lot of ministries is, how do you know if you're actually accomplishing your vision? And maybe even taking one step back, do you even have a vision? And that's, as we ask ministries the question about what their vision is, some are able to articulate it, some have disagreements over it, and some, frankly, are in the process of trying to refine and develop it. And as you begin taking and engaging with your donors, if you have a donor that comes to you and says, hey, listen, I really want to give to a ministry that is accomplishing their vision, what specific markers or benchmarks or dashboarding systems do you have in place today that you could communicate to your ministries or to your donors to affirm to them that we indeed are accomplishing our mission? So what do you point to? Is it just simply attendance? Is it income? What are those measurement markers that you typically point those donors to? So, you know, as we begin talking about this webinar, remember that financing is just simply one method of obtaining the necessary financial resources to accomplishing your vision. It's just a methodology. You know, in the 2 previous weeks, you heard Brian Cluth and you heard Greg Ring, you know, about increasing generosity, maximizing generosity, and planned giving. Those are 2 methods. This last method that we'll be talking about, again, ECCU kind of living in this world about financing. But let me preface this. When you are considering financing, keep this in mind, that you are inviting the lender to the table. And frankly, it doesn't matter which lender it is. We'd love for it to be ECCU, but keep in mind that when you invite the ministry or when you invite the financial institution to the table, you're inviting them to actually speak into your vision in many ways. Because in reality, there are covenants built into the lender agreement, and sometimes it may feel like, and maybe you've had some of these conversations, is that it can feel like they're telling you how to do ministry. But keep in mind, they're keeping their best interest in mind as well, because they have to protect the investment. Proverbs 22:7 talks about how when you engage in a relationship with the lender, you end up becoming a slave to the lender. So you do have to keep an open ear. You have invited them to the board table. You have invited them to your finance committee meetings because they will speak into that. Now, as we take a look at the next slide, we're talking about, it's important for you to know your donors. As before you begin considering going into a relationship with a financial institution, you have to become healthy enough. And we've spoken on this numerous times. You have to know your donors. And, this slide talks about the various donor groups. We look at the Barna Group. They ended up conducting a survey here in June 20th of 2012, and they took a look at the various categories of the different generations. So baby boomers, ages 47 to 65, they're most likely to struggle due to the economy. And in fact, 2 of 5 boomers claim to be affected in a major way, and 40% of them. Among the busters, 28 to 46, 35% of them said that they're likely to struggle, and the mosaics, 18 to 27, 27%. And what was an interesting result of the study was that the boomers were the most likely generation to drop their donations to churches and nonprofits. So again, we have a wide range of those represented here on the webinar, Connie. We're talking about, the churches, obviously the predominant. We have parachurch organizations and mission agencies. But understanding who your donors are absolutely essential. There was one thing that a ministry had said that boomers tend to give to buildings and mosaics tend to give to causes. So as you begin taking a look at your congregation and your donors, keep that perspective in mind. Well, before you begin engaging in a relationship, you have to become healthy. So let's talk about understanding health. I love this quote from Kaiser Permanente. It talks about health in our physical sense. And they said the single most important thing you can do for your health, and again, in the context of our churches and our ministries, the single most thing you could do for your ministry today is to understand your risks and what you can do about them. When you begin thinking about trying to become healthy, I think the preventative measures, the steps that you take proactively are absolutely essential in helping you become healthy, as opposed to realizing you aren't healthy and trying to find a treatment to get you back to that health. One of the things that I like to say is if you're considering financing as an option for funding your vision, make sure that you're financially healthy to take on the debt rather than taking on the debt to see how financially healthy you are. So let me say that one more time. Make sure that you're financially healthy to take on the debt rather than taking on the debt to see how financially healthy you are. Because frankly, I serve at a church. I'm very fortunate to be serving at a church that that we don't have any debt, and we're considering it, but debt can sometimes feel like a very heavy burden. In fact, all of us in our own personal lives, we desire to the day when we won't have debt in our personal lives, and the freedom that could come with that. And it's the same within the ministries that we serve, Connie, because we're talking about how do we free the financial resources so that we can do what God has called us to do to fulfill the mission. Because debt, I believe, will test your leadership. It will test the resolve of your leadership. It will test your vision. It will test your ministry. So I know as we live in the financing world at ECCU, it may seem like I'm trying to talk you out of debt, but I'm trying to encourage you before you seriously consider that is a viable option. Make sure that you are ready to do so. So again, as we take a look at, as you begin looking at your ministry, there are some questions that I'd love to answer as it relates to when is financing not the answer? Because I think there are times when it isn't the appropriate time to take financing. The first talking about, to bridge a poor fiscal practice. The time when you don't want to take on debt is when you aren't, when you feel like you're not being the best steward. Let's just put it that way. A practical way of taking a look at this, if you end up month after month discovering that you're spending more than what's coming in, and every year it seems like you're just operating in the red, financing is not the way to help you get out of that. So that is when financing is not the option. In fact, I just had a conversation with the church, and I said, this was a ministry that was struggling a little bit, and they said, asking them about, what's the purpose of the loan that you're out requesting for on this unsecured debt? And they said, well, we're bleeding, and we need help to be able to build some reserves, and we need some help to be able to stop this bleeding. And that is a typical example when no lender out there would be willing to provide any financing to stop that. The other couple of other scenarios when financing really isn't the answer is to turn negative trends. Again, today we're going to be talking about negative trends. And when you see attendance drop, when you see income drop, when you see trends within the ministry, and they tend to be going down, that's probably, financing is not going to be the solution to help you turn that. It may be a quick fix, but it won't be the ultimate long-term fix. A couple of the other reasons when financing isn't the answer, to speed up to reaching your vision. Sometimes financing is not the best way to be able to help accelerate that vision, because again, it deals with the health. Is your ministry healthy enough to be able to take on and absorb that debt? And the last three reasons that I think when financing is not the answer, have you exhausted every resource? And what I mean by that is, is there a stone that hasn't been turned over that you haven't taken it into consideration? And so take a look at all the different options and the resources that might be available before ultimately resulting to financing, because later on I'll talk about the costs of financing, and it's sometimes very, very substantial. If you don't have any skin in the game, I mean, the reality is, there were years back, even in the mortgage business, you had lenders who would be willing to finance up to 100% of the 110% of the actual value of their property. In the commercial world, back then, there was still, you needed some kind of down payment. In today's world, you're going to need probably at least 25% down payment. We've heard of lenders requiring up to 50% down payment. So if you don't have skin in the game, it's probably a very clear indication that financing is not going to be the answer. And then the last, I think, is the most important when you have to cut ministry. If you have to cut ministry to actually get debt, then, and again, this has a little bit of ECCU bent on it, is that we both firmly believe that the ministry exists to further the kingdom. And if you feel like the only way for you to be able to make the debt payments is you have to cut ministry, that's probably, I could tell you, that's probably going to be an answer that's going to say, I think now is not the time to be taking a look at the financing. So that's, those are some of the, I think, indicators of when financing isn't the answer. Now, in taking a look at the next slide in the typical credit types of things that we take a look at, again, if we could sit with each and every one of you and really uncover what our underwriters think, that would be the ultimate desire, because we have nothing to hide, and I think lenders should have nothing to hide to say this is how we grade you. So let's go down. Everybody's talked about maybe sometimes the 3 C's or the 4 C's or the 5 C's. I would propose that there are actually 6 C's. And again, being in ministry, acrostics very important. So in the 6 C's, the first one being character. And character really talks about, really answers the question, if you can afford to, will you? And it talks about that good management piece of it. And the reason it's the number one is because we have seen, as our relationship managers are around meeting with ministers across the country, the number one reason, I've said this time and time again over the years, is the number one reason why ministries are failing today, and we can point to it, is because of the character issue at the top, the tone at the top. What does that look like? What does that sound like? Is the ministries, is the leadership within the ministry, is there transparency? Is there full integrity in the process? So character is absolutely essential, and we look into that, but that is one of the most difficult to try to underwrite. And that actually comes with meetings and conversations and understanding the stories of how the leadership is making these difficult decisions. The second C we take a look at is cash, and I listed as number 2 is because it is, in fact, the second most common reason why ministries are failing. And again, going back to the character, no matter how much cash you have today, if you have a leader that says, nope, money in the bank means ministry isn't being done, and they just want to spend it all, that cash could disappear very, very rapidly. And so when we take a look at trends in ministries and lenders look at that, you want to make sure that you have adequate cash, unrestricted cash. We'll talk a little bit about what those numbers look like when it comes to cash. Capacity, the third C, capacity and cash flow. And I like to say consistency. It needs to be consistent year over and year end, from fiscal year to another fiscal year. And it answers the question, can you afford to repay the debt? And this, in today's world, it's no longer collateral being sufficient, but you actually have to demonstrate through the management of your cash flow, showing the ability to be able to make those debt payments. The next, collateral, the 4C. Collateral, we see property values declining over the years, but I think we're beginning to see a little bit of uptick in that. Still in certain pockets across the country, depending upon where you're at, it may still feel like you're not seeing a recovery. And I think it's going to be a gradual process, but it feels as though, from what we're seeing in recent appraisals coming in, it appears as though property values are starting to tick upward a little bit. So as a lender, we take a look at the value in that property as a percentage of how much you have outstanding in terms of the debt. The last two, concentration of gifts. This is a little bit unique. You typically won't see this in a lot of lenders, but we like to take a look at the concentration. So we would typically say if you have, their top 5 donors represent over 20% of your overall giving, you would have a high concentration of gift up at the top 5. And again, as I say many times, we're not encouraging you to go to those donors and say, hey, can you decrease your giving? It's really talking about you have to identify the industry that those donors represent and they work in. So if you have a sports figure or an athlete who's donating to, faithfully and tithing to your church, and come to discover in that industry that he may be working in, he may be traded to another sports franchise, right? Or if the individual is involved in, top 5 donors are involved in real estate, and over the years and during the recession, real estate has been very difficult. That's probably why you saw maybe some dips and declines in giving. So understanding your concentration, I think, is very, very important. And then the condition. What's the weather like outside? What's the economic condition looking like outside? And this is something that ECCU and all financial institutions monitor very, very carefully. What is that condition? Because that, I think, will determine the future of what it looks like. Just kind of a little plug for our upcoming Fall Financial Forum. There's a gentleman who's going to be speaking on the Great Economic Recession. So keep that in mind. That there's some fascinating statistics that he's been taking a look at. But the conditions moving forward, it's going to have a significant impact on whether it's going to be the right time to be able to become a borrower. Now, let's take a look at from the lender's eyes. Lenders, the lender, and the reason I put stakeholders is because, as I said, when you invite the lender to the table, they have become an active stakeholder in your ministry and the vision of your ministry. So a couple of the things that we take a look at is, income trends. What's the direction? And lenders are taking a look at it from a more deeper historical perspective. 3 years, 4 years, they're wanting to see how you transitioned out from and through the recession. The other thing that lenders are taking a look at, again, current cash equivalents. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Attendance is extremely critical. Are you seeing a bleeding of the attendance or the enrollment in your school? Or depending upon how you measure the direction of your ministry, is it by donors? Again, there are the metrics that you have, and so I think it's important for you as a ministry to be aware of that. This is how ministries or lenders are taking a look at you. And then we're going to dig into this part. I mean, this is where I think hopefully maybe even by the end of this webinar, you're all going to become actual pretty good underwriters. Key ratios. These are the ratios that financial institutions take a look at. One of the things I think we're going to try to do is we're going to try to have a poll question here.
Yeah, it's David. We're going to go ahead and get some of the perceptions that are out there. We're going to ask you our first poll question. So it's up, as you should be able to see this already. What percentage of your ministry's budget is allocated toward debt? Okay, it looks like 0%. That's the highest result. 36% of you chose that, and then in second place was a 1 to 10%. So, David, what do you think about those results? You have any comments based off what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, obviously, I think it doesn't surprise me in some sense because that's what this webinar is about, right? It's about financing and using financing to accomplish your vision, and obviously, you have 36% of them that doesn't have debt, and I'm assuming you're looking to consider taking a look at that. I think what's a little surprising is that more than 31%, that 6% of you that have at least a third portion of your budget allocated towards the debt, you're probably feeling maybe a little bit more uneasy because, and again, there's some other things that we'll take a look at when we begin taking a look at the ministry buckets, but there's other significant expenses allocated that we take a look at. But more than 31%, that's the group. I think you should be very cautious about considering taking on additional debt. But again, it's a little bit challenging because you have to take a look at some of the other factors within the spending of the ministry. So great results here. In the ministry buckets, this is how we take a look at this, and we talked about those ratios before. So these ministry buckets, when income comes in, and initially we're going to talk about a church, and we'll talk about some of the parachurch organizations and Christian schools. But ministry bucket, you have the income that comes in, and we like to categorize them into three major buckets: the debt, the staffing, and the ministry. Now, if you're a church, we would say debt, you probably shouldn't have anything more than about 35% going towards debt. Then we take a look at salary expense ratio. In the salary expense ratio, you have being allocated towards debt is probably no more than 35% there. 35%. So 35% in debt, 35% in staffing. Now, I've heard time and time again from ministry saying, we can't do ministry with 35% in staffing. And we've seen some national statistic numbers somewhere in that 50% number. But keep in mind, there's another ratio we take a look at, and we'll take a look at that here in a little bit. But the last bucket is ministry, and we believe this is the most critical bucket. It is 30% being allocated towards ministry because, frankly, that's what you and I are doing. We exist to do the work of the ministry. So the more you have allocated towards debt and staffing, the less you have really going towards the ministry portion. But then we take a look at, and that's the salary expense ratio, we take a look at 35%. Then we also, because we're underwriters, we like taking a look at another perspective. It's called a debt service and salary ratio. So we add those two numbers together, the debt and the staffing, and we add those two together and say, probably shouldn't allocate no more than about 70% of your budget towards those two line items. So, we saw some of the statistical numbers. We had some ministries that had, 1 to 10%, So if your debt is only 10% of your budget, then we would look at that and say you probably have a little bit more room to be able to absorb on a staffing side. So we not just only isolate that particular bucket, but we also combine those two buckets to take a look at what that combined debt service and salary ratio looks at. Now, for those that are the schools and the parachurch organizations, you have the tuition and the income coming in from your donors across the country. The debt piece of it, obviously, it's significantly less. We would say, boy, as a school, as a parachurch organization, you probably shouldn't allocate no more than about 15% of your budget towards debt. Then we also have, again, salary expense ratio, we would say no more than about 65%. Obviously, when you have 65% in the debt, again, we'll take a look at the debt service and salary ratio. That leaves you basically only about 20% left for ministry. Okay, so this is a general overview, maybe about a 35, 40,000 foot level perspective. And again, as we talked about the debt service and salary ratio in the church world, it's about 70%. In the parachurch organization and the school, we're probably looking at somewhere nothing north of about 80% there. Now, here's probably the most critical ratio. Any lender that you talk to and you meet with, if you're able to articulate to the financial institution, hey, our debt service coverage ratio is X, that gives the lender probably a little bit more confidence in knowing that you are actually watching some very key ratios. I like to describe this particular ratio almost like a GPA. I mean, it is the first ratio that lenders will hone in on. So let me give you a little bit of perspective on how we calculate the debt service coverage ratio, and you can do this yourself. So we'll take a look at your net income. So your change in net assets, another way of taking a look at that. So your net income will add your interest expense that you had for the year. We'll add that to the net income. Then we'll add, if you expense out your depreciation and amortization. If you don't have that, then you're not going to add, obviously, that back. But we're going to take a look at those three figures: net income, interest expense, and your depreciation and amortization. We'll add those three figures together, and we'll come to a figure that's called the available for debt. That available for debt is the figure from a cash flow perspective that says this is what is essentially available to make your annual debt payments. So we'll divide that available for debt, divide it by the annual debt payments, and you'll get to a figure that says this is the percentage. Ideally, and this is ECCU specific, we'd like to see you north of probably 120, 125%. We've seen lenders as high as, I've heard one lender require 180%, and I thought that was pretty significant. But you'll see built into your loan covenants, and that's why it's important for you to read your loan agreements before you sign those, because there will be covenant performance requirements by lenders that will say year after year you have to perform at least 100% or 110% or 120%. That's a figure that you can calculate easily yourself. But again, there's a little bit of art to it, because in that net income figure there may be some significant one-time gifts. So let's say, for example, if your income for the year was $1 million, but you had a one-time gift from a donor who sold their business and gave you, tithed on that and gave you $250,000. If they did that, we would end up backing that $250,000 out from the net income, because the likelihood of that recurring is very, very slim. And we would encourage you as a ministry, you probably don't want to rely on somebody or family selling their business and tithing on that year after year. So there's a little bit of art to that, but in general, you kind of get an idea of what that looks like.
Thanks, David. I think that's a great tool that you just provided for the ministries to give them an idea of how they can quickly assess where they're at, and it's definitely something that is easy to do, but at the same time you've touched on a subject that the one-time gifts, that's what I hear from ministries that I talk to. They don't anticipate having to do that, so it's great to consider that. Let's ask another poll question. So this is, again, the part where you get to interact with us, and here it is. Is your ministry considering financing? And if so, how soon? So we have a variety of answers to choose from. Please select the one that best applies to you, and we'll take a look at the results in just a moment. In today's market, David, are we seeing a lot of ministries still pursuing financing?
Well, I think it's almost like in the home mortgage side too. I think everybody feels as though they've missed the boat because interest rates have been low. But it's still from a perspective of history, it is still historically low rates, even on the commercial side. But I think, well, as we take a look at the results of this, pretty fascinating of what we see. We see here, obviously, 42%, not at this time. And it sounds to me like you're in a wonderful position. This is where you ought to be talking with your lender and talking about what do we need to do to get ready. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the practical steps. But 42% within the year, you don't have a lot of time, because frankly, you should be ready from a financial perspective, from a debt coverage perspective, all the ratios we talked about. 1 to 2, 3 to 5 years from now, you have time, and time is your best friend still, where you can begin making the necessary adjustments. But just like any other debt, Connie, I think it's important for you to talk to your lender early and talk to them about what do we need to do, or how much can we even afford based on today's budget. And if it feels as though that's not going to be adequate enough, then you're going to have to start making some adjustments to be able to get to the place where you feel as though that amount of debt is adequate to helping you fulfill your vision.
Yeah, it's one thing to consider financing, but what is the cost involved? I think that's an important topic to address.
Boy, costs. It's not just having to pay 1% origination point, and that's the first point right there. It's not just the having to get the loan, but there are some other costs associated that I think a lot of ministries don't think about. Obviously, you typically be seeing somewhere around that 1% range in terms of what you're borrowing. You have your appraisal and your title. I mean, today, depending upon the size of your property, I mean, appraisals can run you several thousands of dollars. You talk about interest. This is probably the biggest cost. There's cost to borrowing, and I did a calculation here. Even on $1 million at 5.5%, and assuming rates never change for the entire term of the loan, if it's 25 years, and again, it doesn't mean your rate is fixed for 25 years, but in an example, if it remained the same as you were renewing every 5 years, you would be spending $870,000 for that $1 million. So that's a significant cost. I like to say, boy, if you didn't have to do that, wonder what you could do with that $870,000 in the work of the ministry. And obviously being involved in ministry on the education side, well, that's a lot of crayons I could buy, I'll tell you that. So the other cost, there's costs associated with banking requirements, because today lenders, if you have a lender who's going to lend you money, they're going to require many times for you to move your entire banking relationships over. So don't consider that as a surprise. If they're willing to scratch your back, you have to be willing to scratch their back, and that's really what's going to happen. Sometimes lenders will actually require what are called compensating balances. So you have to be very careful. I came across a situation where a lender was essentially lowballing rates out there, and so the ministry just thought, oh, that's a fantastic rate. Well, the compensating balance that the financial institution was requiring, a $2 million compensating balance that was going to earn essentially about 0.1% on that for the initial term. Well, there's costs embedded to that, and they could not touch that $2 million. So you begin taking a look at, if it's a banking requirement change, then banking transitional costs. It's not the most exciting things for ministries to do, but it is a very necessary thing, especially when you're considering financing. There are also costs of reporting requirements. Some lenders will require, if you're used to just only doing compilations or just reviews, depending upon the complexity of the ministry and the size of the loan, you may be looking at audit requirements. And so all of a sudden you have costs year after year that are going to increase. But I think one of the most, the overlooked cost is control over decisions. And again, as I said at the beginning, sometimes it's going to feel like the lender is telling you how to do ministry. There's a cost embedded into that. There's a covenants built into that you're going to have to watch very, very carefully. Because if you fail, if you violate any of the covenants in today's world, in a even more heavily regulated, you may end up sometimes paying anywhere up to 2% over what your current rate is during the time that you violated the covenant. And so make sure that you understand those kinds of costs. But in reality, what's changed? I mean, there's a lot that's changed. This is something that I've been speaking on over the past 4 years, and we're still seeing a lot of ministry that are still not focused on the mission. They're just kind of trying to keep their head above water, and they're just saying, we just need to survive. We got to survive this next week. We got to survive this next month. So that's still out there. There are some ministries that feel like they're probably a little bit above water, but I think that's still the same tone. Covenants. Understand that there are more covenants being built into loan agreements, and they are a lot more serious. They will pull the trigger if you violate a covenant. So understand what those requirements are. Like I said, obtaining financing in all aspects, residential and commercial, it is just more challenging today. You're providing more documentation than ever before, documentation that you've never had to provide before. There are now, environmental studies that are being required, or phase 1 or phase 2 remediation requirements to be able to, fix what your property may have underneath it, asbestos, whatever the case may be. There are more and more stringent requirements that's being placed upon the borrower. Less capital in the market. I think financial institutions, they do have a ton of liquidity. They do have a ton of cash, but they're still unwilling to release to the B paper, C paper credit types of borrowers. And what I mean by that is A paper credit is everybody wants to lend to them. When you get down to the B and the C credit, nobody wants to lend to them. And so that's what's very, very difficult for a lot of ministries. And that's why I said before, you got to become healthy enough so that you have lenders who are bidding for your business. And so everybody essentially has to raise the bar, raise the financial bar within your ministry, and to be able to operate within what God has entrusted to you. And then I think what's changed, faith versus finances. This is a continued message, and I don't think this will ever change. Please don't spend in anticipation and hope that you're going to grow. You have to demonstrate that you actually are growing as a ministry, that you are fulfilling your vision and your mission, and then I think you'll gain the confidence of your lender. A couple of practical steps that you can take today. I kind of play on this a little bit. Build liquidity. You got to build liquidity, and the reason I keep doing this is you just have to build liquidity. It doesn't require a scientist to be able to or a CPA to understand the importance of this. Remember, I talked about the number 2 reason of why ministries fail today. It is liquidity and lack thereof. So you got to make sure that you continue to build that. Here's an interesting study that was done by Christianity Today, and this was a study done from State of the Plate. Brian Cluth in his study of 1,000, what is that, close to about 1,800 participants, talked about the financial reserves and what they have today. It looks like 55% of them, had less than 60 days. And what we would say, and again, this is in the church market, but we've seen it consistent even within the parachurch and the Christian schools as well. What we would say, and this is a question that comes up all the time, Connie, is, boy, well, just give me the number. How much should we have? And we have some resources out there. There's actually a white paper that talks about how much reserves is enough. Churches, if you're a church, we would say you got to have somewhere between that 60 to 90 day of operating reserves, unrestricted cash that you could use it for, whether it be operations or what have you. Christian schools, you're going to be looking at somewhere close to about 90 to 120 days. And then for parachurch organizations, somewhere between 90 to 180 days. And the reason as you get to the Christian schools and the parachurch organizations, it needs to be a little bit higher is because the distance between you, and I'm not talking about the physical distance, but I'm talking about the communication distance sometimes, because you don't get at the opportunity to be able to appeal to your donors every week like a church does. Your donors may be all across the country. So how do you communicate the need for having to increase giving so that you can replenish your cash reserves? That's why we feel that's so critical. But cash reserves, there's a lot of components built into this kind of, because it's not only understanding the cash flow fluctuations, knowing that the summer months are going to be low months and you need cash to be able to bridge that, but it's also the unplanned events that come up in everyday ministry. You just can't predict what's going to happen. And if you look back 4 years, over the last 4 years, I don't think any of us could have predicted everything that was going to happen within our ministry. And then obviously, I think this is the most important. How many times, especially when we serve the ministries in Colorado Springs, there's been some significant fires. And I could tell you there are ministries today that are in Colorado Springs that would have said, boy, I wish we had some money to be able to minister to those people and the families who have been displaced, to do the work of the ministry to which God has called us to. And those God opportunities, if you don't have the reserves, you can't do the work of what God has called you to do. And so I think that's a little bit uncomfortable for a lot of ministries today. But in all seriousness, liquidity is one thing, but some practical steps that I think what we could do today, I've talked about it already. Build the liquidity, be disciplined, set aside money a little bit at a time, build it into your budget. Don't just wait till the end of the fiscal year and say, hey, what do we have left over, and then move it over. But build it in as an expense line item. Make sure that you read and update your bylaws. It's pretty fascinating when we engage with ministries we tell them, from a leadership standpoint, oh, it looks like your bylaws require for you to have 5 board members, and they have 3. And they said, we're comfortable with 3. I said, your bylaws state 5. And so we actually hold our ministries accountable to the bylaws because that's what you said you were going to operate under. Make sure you read those bylaws and amend those if you're not following those. Amend it to what is appropriate for your ministry today. Some other things, make sure you monitor your variances in your budget and push down that accountability. If you have ministry leaders, communicate to them openly. They may not be financial people, financially minded individuals, but they understand when they spend more than what was allotted to them. And hold them accountable and ask the question why. Because I think we ought to be asked the question why from our donors. Why are we doing what we're doing? Staff expense control, this is it continues to be a very hot topic item. I think it's extremely important for us to always ask the question, is this the position that we need today to help us fulfill and get us closer to accomplishing our vision? Open up your communication. You got to communicate to your donors. Share with them what's going on in your ministry, how God is moving within your ministry. Share about your baptism. Share about your conversions. Share about the life transformations, because that's what gets, we talked about the earlier study on some of the, Gen Yers and the Mosaics. They are giving to causes, and if they see causes making a difference, they are more apt to be able to give to that. So communicate that, communicate financial reports, and please, by all means, don't just copy your financial reports and leave it in the foyer and say, hey, here's how we're doing, because a lot of people don't understand what that means. And I think the last, establishing benchmarks, dashboards. This is something, a practice that we're beginning to see more and more of ministries embracing, is that make sure whatever benchmarks that you have in place, how do you know if you're accomplishing that? Make sure that it's meaningful, measurable, manageable, and then obviously from an acrostic standpoint, make sure that it's actionable. Make sure that you can do this and you can accomplish this. And so those are some of the practical steps that, Connie, that I think hopefully if you can take one or two of those and start acting upon those, I think we'll get a little bit closer.
David, I think that there's a lot of great information that our ministries can take away, and because of the technical difficulties that we had earlier, we don't have as much time as we would like for questions. So what we'll do is any questions that came in, we will somehow get in touch with you and answer those questions. Again, thank you, David Lee, for doing that. What I'd like to share with you about is some additional resources that we have here that we will be providing for you. You will be receiving a survey. Once you complete that survey, this will allow you to receive the webinar recording as well as the resources that are up here, and maybe even some additional ones. And I also want to inform you that this is a series that we are concluding today, and so the other two webinars that we did are available on our website. The recordings are available, so I encourage you to go on our website, and if you want to listen to those, you can definitely access them through the website, and that way you can get an idea of how the series connects to one another. We have some upcoming events here at ECCU. We want to share with you. One of them is funding and facilities, and these are taking place in select areas throughout the United States. And then we also have a financial forum that we do every year here on site on our campus. So if you're nearby and you want to attend that, we have links here on the screen that you can go to and register for those events. Our financial forum is one of our biggest events that we hold each year, and we have hundreds of ministries that come and visit us and hear our speakers, and there's a lot of great information. So those are just some things that we do here at ECCU. We would love to talk to your ministry, so thank you for attending today, but if you have questions for us, if you'd like to talk to us more about financing, that is something that we do here at ECCU. We also have a financial health assessment or a cash reserve consultation that we offer for free to ministries. Give us a call. We'd love to learn about your ministry. We'd love to get to know more about you and what God's doing through your ministry, and use these tools if it is applicable. So thank you again for hanging in there with us as we work through our technical difficulties. We're so glad that you were able to push through. We also want to inform you that to be looking out for the email with the survey. And thanks again, David, for joining us. This concludes our Funding Your Vision series,